Good evening, and thanks for joining us for this teen dating violence webinar. My name is Tammy Sander. I do communications for the Hamilton County Health Department. I'm joined tonight by a pair of health experts who will teach us exactly what teen violence looks like, how to talk to your kids about it, and where to find help. Tonight's webinar is the ninth in a series of webinars geared toward children's health. We're hosting an array of topics, everything from the importance of lead testing to HPV vaccines, even tips to talking to your kids about vaping. These webinars are part of a larger effort to reach out to parents, caregivers, and educators so they can make more informed decisions about the health and well-being of their kiddos. We will feature a full list of those webinar topics, the few that are left for the year, at the end of this session. But first, let me start by introducing tonight's panel. Kaylin Underhill is a health educator at the Hamilton County Health Department. She is a health education and promotion graduate from Ball State. If you've never met Kaylin, there's probably a pretty good chance that your kids have, because she travels all over the county to teach kids everything from teen dating violence, like we're talking about now, to dental health and everything under the stars in between. Kelly Groudon is a prevention coordinator at Prevail. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science and education, as well as a master's in public service. As a former educator, Kelly is passionate about serving and supporting young people and really helping them build safe, stable, and nurturing relationships. So, what do we as parents know about teen dating violence? As these statistics might suggest, very little. 81% of parents don't even know that dating violence among teens is an issue. And many of us, myself included, wrongly assume it's limited to physical violence. But as our speakers are about to share with us, there's more to it than that. They're going to help us understand the different kinds of violence our children may encounter from a partner, help us identify the warning signs, and give us some advice on how to best talk to our teens about it. Kelly, let's start with you. The most obvious question: if there's more to teen dating violence than just physical violence, what is it?
Right, thank you, Tammy. So glad to be here tonight. Thank you for having me. Teen dating violence is a big umbrella term that refers to all sorts of different kinds of harm that teens might experience in their relationship. Many of us tend to think of that physical violence first, whether that be hitting, punching, kicking, burning, trapping, restraining, anything along those lines. Anything that harms our physical body would be considered physical dating violence. But beyond that, we also see psychological abuse occur quite frequently. Okay, and so this is anything that's going to harm our emotional well-being and our mental well-being and sense of self-esteem, whether that is coercion, whether that is insults, whether that is manipulation. We can see how abuse doesn't have to be physical to be incredibly harmful. Additionally, a lot of teens face sexual abuse in their relationships at the hands of their dating partner, whether that is forced kissing, groping, inappropriate touching, or all the way through rape, which is that forced penetrative sex. Sexual abuse becomes very common among teenagers as well. Finally, abuse doesn't even have to be in person, right? Abuse can be digital, it can be online. It's anything that happens on our phone or on our social media, right? Whether that is tracking our location, monitoring our interactions and behavior, posting or threatening to post private content. Okay? That can kind of fall under that spectrum of digital dating violence as well. We know that dating violence among teenagers is incredibly common. Unfortunately, when we look at nationwide statistics, we know that 1 out of every 3 teens will be in an abusive relationship by the time they graduate high school. Now, if you break that down a little bit further, that psychological abuse becomes incredibly common, with 1 out of 3 teens experiencing that emotional harm. In the state of Indiana, 1 out of every 10 teens faces physical violence in their relationship at the hands of the person that they are dating. Beyond that, in Indiana, 1 out of every 12 teenagers in relationships experience sexual violence from their dating partner. What may be even more alarming is that much of this dating violence goes unreported. It flies under the radar completely, right? We know that only about a third of teens that experience abuse in their relationships ever tell anyone, right? And so as we're thinking about those statistics, they're probably on the low side. Right. We know that dating violence may actually be much more common, and we're just not hearing about it. One of the questions that we hear a lot at Prevail is why people would stay in an abusive relationship, right? And this is it's incredibly surprising to people who have not had this experience before. People say, like, if your partner is treating you so poorly, why wouldn't you leave, or why wouldn't you just break up with them? Right. And it's not always that simple. There's a lot of reasons that people may be reluctant to leave their relationship, even if they're experiencing harm from their partner. Okay? That might be fear. Okay, they may be too scared to leave their partner. Their partner may have threatened them or intimidated them or coerced them. They may be blackmailing them, right, or extorting them. Okay, and that person might be afraid of the consequences if they try to leave that relationship. We oftentimes place a lot of shame on people who have experienced abuse in their relationship when we talk about this culturally, right? It can be embarrassing when we talk about abuse and we think, how could anybody get themselves in that situation? It can be really hard to come forward and then say, you know what, hey, I'm here, I'm experiencing this, right? We might be embarrassed. Okay, many victims of abuse don't imagine themselves in that situation, right? When I am traveling around the county and I am talking to kids, last year I had the opportunity to work with almost 6,000 students in Hamilton County, right? And almost all of them say, oh, that's not going to be me, right? I wouldn't let that happen. Okay? And so it becomes shameful and embarrassing to admit that. Beyond that, culturally speaking, many behaviors that we would consider harmful or abusive are often normalized in media, in our relationship models, in our peer groups, in our schools, right? And so often kids do not recognize those red flags in their relationships as being something that's problematic. We see it so often and so frequently, it just feels normal to us. Okay, one example of this that I use a lot with my students is when we talk about extreme jealousy, right? Jealousy is a normal emotion, but what we do with that emotion can be incredibly harmful. And so when I have kids say things like, well, my partner's only really jealous, that must mean because they really love me, right? Or my partner won't let me talk to other guys or other girls, and it's because they're afraid of losing me, right? And so we justify these behaviors, even though we may know that they're harmful, or we may have that like inkling in the back of our mind that that's not okay, but because we see it so frequently, we normalize it and we accept it. Um, just like being afraid of those consequences that we're leaving, we might also be afraid of future threats to ourselves and to our families and our loved ones, right? We can also hear a lot of manipulative statements in abusive relationships, such as, if you leave me, I'm going to hurt myself, right? And we don't want that to happen, right? We're afraid of those consequences. Many people who do experience harm in their dating relationships also suffer from low self-esteem. We know that when people are experiencing that abuse, especially that psychological abuse, they're often made to feel less than, right? Or they're not good enough. Okay? We hear abusive partners say things like, no one else will ever love you, or you're so stupid, I don't know why I put up with you, or statements along those lines, right? Which becomes really damaging to our psyche when we hear that over and over and over and over again. Okay, so oftentimes victims of abuse don't feel like they deserve any better. They feel grateful to have a partner that will tolerate them even if they're not treated well. Right. And so that low self-esteem, that psychological impact of abuse can be incredibly harmful and make it really hard for someone to leave. They think, well, it's not a great relationship, but it's better than nothing, or I don't deserve any differently. And finally, this one is really hard for a lot of people to understand, but sometimes people stay with their abusive partner because they love them, right? They are attached to them. They have a great relationship, okay? Or they think so, okay? And so sometimes people choose to take the bad with the good, right? We might say, I love my partner, but they have a bad temper, but that's only like 10% of the time, right? Or when things are good, they're so great that I just want to stay there, right? I want to experience that, even though there's also this really bad stuff here too. Okay, people are attached to their partners. Abusive relationships are not 100% bad 100% of the time, right? You wouldn't be with somebody if there wasn't good stuff there too, if there wasn't a connection there too. Okay, and that love and that emotional interdependence and that connection can be really strong, even in relationships that might seem harmful. We know on average it takes about 7 attempts for a victim to leave their abuser completely. Okay, and we'll get more into that cycle of violence and why people might come back later on this evening, but it can be incredibly difficult for someone to walk away, and whether that's their partner calling them back and saying, oh, I love you, I'm sorry, come back, whether that is giving into a threat or intimidation or fear of their partner, whatever that might be, it's not always as easy as just walking away.
All right, Kaylin, can you run us through the different forms of teen dating violence? Perhaps show us some of the warning signs that parents should or could be on the lookout for?
Yeah, of course. So Kelly kind of mentioned towards the beginning a couple different types of abuse that we see. So the first one, as she mentioned, is physical, right? So this is mainly the one that everybody kind of thinks about when you hear teen dating violence, anything like that related, right? So when we're looking at physical abuse, this is basically when a person hurts or tries to attempt to hurt their partner or somebody by hitting, kicking, right? It's always has to do with that force behind it. We want to talk about the warning signs, especially deep diving into each of these different ones, right? The main thing while we do go into these and kind of what these warning signs look like is just knowing that a lot of these can overlap with one another. It doesn't have to be this single one by itself. A lot of the times it can be multiple at the same time. That is very, very normal, right? And that's where a lot of times, especially students that I talk to, they kind of get confused thinking that it has to be physical versus psychological versus another kind, right? But we do know that a lot of these do overlap. And most of the time, we do see a lot of these different warning signs through different aspects. So when we're looking at physical abuse, you can see here a lot of the different things that we have listed, some of the main things that we see. So number one would be that mental aspect, right? The depression, the anxiety with it. That's the most common things that we see, especially when it comes to these different types of abuse. You can see that second top one up there. It talks about bruising, cuts, broken bones, right? I also wanted to mention with this, a lot of the times, say you have a child, right? And you may be a little worried about maybe something else is going on behind the scenes that you're not aware of. Oftentimes, teens will go through those different routes to try to hide these bruises, cuts, whatever the markings are, right? Maybe they always wear long sleeves to try to cover them up. Maybe it's in the middle of summer, it's 90 degrees outside, and they're still wearing long sleeves, right? Just to avoid that confrontation and just getting to that point of having somebody else actually see those marks on them, right? Then we also have that isolation part. This has many different variables with it. This can be isolating from their closest friends that they have, their family members, right? Maybe just isolating with their partner alone. That's the only person that they feel like they can trust, right? It's that back and forth that we see a lot. And then also with students, a main giveaway is normally performance in school, right? We will see grades drop over time. Their main focus isn't for their academics anymore. Their main focus normally shifts to their partner, right? Especially when it is that unhealthy, toxic relationship that just really consumes the person, right? And then also, Kelly kind of mentioned this in the previous ones, that loss of self-esteem, that loss of self-confidence, that can go into even deeper problems with sleeping problems. Maybe they have constant nightmares, right? It's all that anxiety behind it that really builds up with that. And then the last two down there, you can also see one, maybe a partner is very overprotective of their partner, right? We're going to get into kind of what that looks like with the other examples as well. And then lastly, we often see this a lot of times with females, even though it does happen both ways, right? Where a lot of the times the way that they dress or present themselves, whether that's makeup, whatever it is, that kind of starts to shift to whatever the partner is normally kind of forcing them to. Awesome. And then going into the second one that we mentioned, psychological abuse. So this is basically, this has to do with the mental and the emotional aspect. So this can be verbal. There's also nonverbal ways that really has that intent to harm, like we said with that physical abuse, right? But it's that emotional aspect. So it's having that control over that partner. Here again are some warning signs of kind of what the psychological abuse looks like. You may see some of these look pretty familiar from the first one that we went over. Like I said, a lot of these do overlap, but a couple things that we haven't really mentioned so far. Number one, you can see up there, says maybe somebody is terrified or really, really scared to miss a call or text from their partner, right? If they are not answering them right then and there, that can create a huge problem. So they always want to make sure that they're reachable by their partner. You also have a lot of different times, unfortunately, I've had so many conversations with students where they just seem like they just kind of lost their favorite hobbies, or they just don't feel like showing up to sports or whatever it is. It's really that big of a difference that can just be like that, when you can tell that they have definitely lost their interest in different things that they used to love, right? And then you have that guilting aspect as well. If you don't do this, if you don't call me back right when I try to call you and I can't get a hold of you, they're going to push and push and push that against their partner, right? It's almost like using that as leverage to try to get what they want. And that goes hand in hand with the next one, as you can see, unpredictable temper, right? That is a huge one. You can never really tell, especially when you have a partner who is doing these to their partners, kind of just figuring out what mood they're in, if their mood's going to switch like a flick, right? Constantly checking in. There's a couple other examples that kind of go with that when we'll get to the other ones as well. But a huge one that we often hear about with teens especially is if somebody doesn't get their way in a relationship, almost every time, a lot of the times people will mention threats. Maybe that is to threaten to harm themselves, right? Threaten to harm their partner, their family members. There's a lot of different aspects when it comes to that. And then the next one, so you have sexual abuse, right? So sexual abuse, there's kind of different perspectives when we're talking about this. So this is really when it comes to forcing or attempting to force any kind of sexual act on somebody, whether that does not have consent present, maybe the person is unable to consent, right? Or they just refuse in general. And like I said, kind of two parts with this. The other half has to do with sexual abuse that is kind of like online. So sharing sexual pictures back and forth, right? Again, it has to do with that consent part right there. With sexting, right? Sex and texting, a huge thing that we are seeing, but a lot of different difficulties that can come with that as well. So here are some warning signs that have to do with sexual abuse, okay? We have a lot of times when people try to cope with these different types of abuse, we normally either see very unusual weight gain or weight loss, just kind of depending on how they decide to cope with this. We also see a lot of sexually transmitted diseases, right? If this is something that's reoccurring, maybe your teen has maybe mentioned something, like something seems off, right? Just kind of take it as a red flag, try to see what else is going on behind the doors. And then the third one, we kind of mentioned this like the other ones, just kind of withdrawing from normal activities, their favorite hobbies. Maybe they're not hanging out with their best friends like they used to, right? And then also a huge one, which I would probably say one of the main ones here on the screen, is just honestly increasing knowledge of these different aspects of sexual comments, pictures, right? Especially when you don't think that it is age appropriate, as you can see on there. Maybe it seems like a little too much that you feel like they should not know about. That's also a red flag that we really want to push when it comes to these different types of warning signs as well. Awesome. And then we have digital abuse. So this one, every time I talk to parents about this one, they just look at me like I have five heads. Yes, this is a different kind, right? So this is basically just using technology, right? This can be texting, calling, this can be using the internet, social media, but it's basically kind of the same concept. It's bullying, harassing, even stalking, right? Somebody with their partner through this. And then we also wanted to mention some warning signs with this because this one is a little different. They have a lot different, more examples than the other ones that we kind of mentioned. As you can see, I hear so often how many students, especially in high school, tell me that their partner forces them to take their phone, give them their password so they can go through it right then and there. This, I mean, it blew my mind how often I've had conversations with students about this. And it really put it into perspective because from their point of view, this is normal, right? This is normalized. This is what they're used to. They don't know that's a red flag. They don't know that it's unhealthy because everybody else around them at the school is doing the same thing. Like I said, that's a huge topic that I always talk to students about. And that's why you can see it's up there, one of the first ones. Constantly texting someone, like we kind of mentioned, if they constantly call you, you're blowing up your phone and you don't answer, that can cause several other problems down the road that they just may want to avoid. So they're going to be there right then, answering every call and text that they get from them. And then a second one is if somebody has multiple devices. So we were talking earlier and we mentioned how some students and some teens will have one phone, right? If a parent goes through their phone, everything looks fine. Nothing's jumping out. No red flags really seen. A lot of the times, especially recently, people are realizing that teenagers have second phones. It's like a burner phone. This is where a lot of the times we can see the hidden things that you aren't seeing on their real phone, when in reality, it's still going on behind the scenes, right? That's a huge one that I know parents really aren't aware of. You think, oh, I looked through their phone or they told me this and that, but there's really something deeper behind that. And then kind of going along with sharing or even stealing passwords, it kind of goes hand in hand with just having them look through your phone, right? That's where that trust issue comes in. A lot of the times it can be a lot of different things, but the main thing is also being online. We know that everything is on there forever. Nothing ever is fully deleted. So when these online threats come from partners, especially, that can be very intimidating. That could be very scary, especially for it to be out there in the public for everybody to see, not just you privately.
Okay, Kelly. So it seems like there is a pretty fine line between these different buckets, healthy, unhealthy, and abusive relationships. Can you kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about healthy relationships, we are talking about relationships that are based on respect, right? Respect for our partner's thoughts and feelings and bodies and boundaries and the things and people that are important to them, right? We communicate with our partner. We are open and honest with our partner. We talk about things that bother us. We trust our partner and they trust us, right? Because we have that openness and that honesty and that good communication, it lays a solid foundation for a trusting relationship where we don't have to go through each other's phones or track their locations, right? Healthy relationships should feel equal and balanced. No one's in charge. Okay? You both bring the same amount of power to the table. Okay. And that's not to say that there's not going to be some give and take sometimes, right? Sometimes you may have to lean on your partner for a little extra support or vice versa. But overall, things should feel pretty balanced, right? No one's making the decisions. Okay. We're doing that mutually together. Okay. In a healthy relationship, we are not only spending time with our partner. We can also spend time away from our partner, right? We all have our own families, we have our own friends, we have our own hobbies. Sometimes you just really want some downtime by yourself, right? And in a healthy relationship, your partner can respect that. Your partner can say, hey, we're going to spend some time together on Friday night, and I'm going to go out with my friends on Saturday, and that's totally okay, right? Because we do have that trust. We do respect our partner as a unique individual who also prioritizes other things and also has relationships that they want to care for. Okay. In an unhealthy relationship, we start to see kind of a shift in that balance. We might not call it abusive yet, but it's maybe not very mature or not very respectful. Maybe we're not communicating well. Maybe we're using things like the silent treatment instead of addressing our problems. Maybe we see some disrespect from one person towards the other. Okay, maybe we start to see some suspicion and not being trustful and not wanting our partner to spend time away from us. Okay, maybe we start to feel a little bit pressured by our partner, like they want us to do certain things or give up certain things that we love and care about. Okay, we start to feel a little bit of that imbalance in our relationship. And then when we look at abusive relationships, abuse is all about power and control, right? So power over or control over our partner. So here we see those scales really tip towards one partner. Okay, we see one person who is in charge or trying to take control of the situation. They may be communicating in a harmful way, right? Threatening or intimidation or making declarative statements and almost orders towards their partner. Okay, we might see some mistreatment, just general name calling or not prioritizing your partner's needs. We might see excessive jealousy and constantly accusing your partner of cheating when it's not true. That's going to be that piece of, I don't want you talking to other guys or other girls, or why is their number in their phone, or why did that person come up to you at the movie theater and say hello? Like, are you cheating on me? In abusive relationships, we often see that that person causing harm does not take responsibility for their behavior and will shift the blame onto the person who is being harmed, right? And so that might sound like, oh, I didn't do that. You made that up, right? Or it wasn't that bad, or I was just joking. You really need to get a sense of humor, right? Or even, if you wouldn't make me so mad, I wouldn't have to hit you. Okay, and really shifting that blame onto the person who's experiencing harm. Okay, as Kaylin kind of mentioned before too, isolation is a huge warning sign for lots of different kinds of abuse. Okay, and that can be big and mean and scary, as in you're not allowed to talk to other guys or other girls. Or you can't leave our house, or you are not allowed to have a job. But it can also sound like, if you really loved me, you'd spend time with me instead of going out with your friends. Okay. Or I don't know why you never want to be with me, or your parents' rules are so stupid and they're just trying to control you, and you're basically an adult, so you should just sneak out of the house. Right. And really kind of controlling your time and your access to other people. And that can be especially harmful when you do recognize your partner's harmful behavior and you want to get out, you lose your support system. Right. If we stop hanging out with our friends, if we stop texting them back, if we stop sitting with them at lunch, we're going to lose those friendships. right? And so then when we recognize that we need that help, we don't have anybody to turn to. Okay, that's why isolation is such a common abusive strategy and why it can be so devastating to people who are experiencing harm. I mentioned earlier that we do tend to see abuse happen in a cyclical nature, right? Things aren't always 100% bad. Okay, and so what typically happens is, we meet somebody, we click, we are hanging out, we're having fun, we're, building that connection, we really like them, we really care about them, we might even fall in love, right? And things seem okay. And then we start to see the tension build a little bit, right? We start to see some of those controlling behaviors creep in. We start to see more demands on your time. Okay, or we hear them saying things like, oh, you're in drama club? That's so dumb. What a waste of time. You should quit. Okay, or I know you like playing basketball, but that really takes away from our time together. And if you loved me, you would quit, right? And so we start to see these conflicts kind of creep up, and we see that abusive partner maybe starting to make more attempts at controlling what's happening, right? Your friends don't like me, so if you were loyal to me, you'd stop hanging out with them, right? And so we can see some of those behaviors creep in where if you're in that relationship, you could be sitting there thinking, well, I guess they have a point. Or, yeah, I really don't get to spend a lot of time with them because of X activity, right? Or I can tell this is really important to them, so I'm going to be a good partner and give up the things that I care about, right? As that tension escalates, we eventually see what we would call that explosive phase, right? There's a massive event. There's that accusation of cheating. There is the first instance of physical violence. There is, the first real threat. There is, just something major that happens between those two partners that is the big, explosive, scary thing, right? That often makes that person experiencing harm step back and say, whoa, this is not okay, or I don't feel safe, or maybe this isn't the relationship for me, right? And often that abuser is going to come back and they're going to say, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. I was drunk. I didn't know what I was saying. I'm just under so much stress lately. I just lost my temper, right? You know how much I love you. Here, let me buy you flowers. Let me buy you this jewelry. Let me take you out to dinner. Let me, do whatever. Let's go on that vacation together, or let's have this great date together, right? And it's that honeymoon phase all over again. And we feel reconnected to that person. We feel loved. We feel valued. We feel like we can maybe justify their earlier transgressions because they're being pretty great right now. Okay, and then that cycle starts all over again where we see that tension come back into play and we see those controlling behaviors start up again.
Okay,
So,
so yeah, go ahead.
okay, as we kind of understand now a little bit more what abuse looks like, I feel like the major question is what can I do as a parent to help safeguard my child, right? Or as a caregiver. And so there's a couple of things to consider here. Number one, abuse is not a naturally occurring thing, right? This isn't cancer. This isn't a tornado. It's a choice somebody makes to harm somebody else. Abuse is a learned behavior. Okay, we may have seen that modeled for us in our home growing up. We may see it in the media that we consume, whether that is music or TV or movies or even the news, right? We might see it in our peer groups around us. Okay, our kids are going out into the world and learning how to be a person, right? And how to be in a relationship. And so our job becomes making sure that they see healthy relationships modeled. Okay? Whether that is in our own home, whether that is, fixing our own relationships and prioritizing those healthy behaviors, or whether that is recognizing those when we see them in other places, like on TV or in the movies, right? Unfortunately, what we mostly see in our culture is unhealthy or even abusive relationships. Healthy relationships do not make good TV. There's no drama there, right? And so we want to be able to point that out to our kids and have those discussions with them so we can help them learn the appropriate behavior and the appropriate way to interact with their partner. A lot of times, when parents talk or when we kind of look back at our own upbringing, we think about the talk, right? And this is this big one-time scary thing, and we feel like we're, sharing all of this knowledge and then it's done and over, right? That cannot be the case. If you want to help your kid, you need to be talking to them all the time. This is not just a one-time thing, check, done, I don't have to parent anymore. Okay, we talk early, we talk often. We reiterate the same points over and over until your kid is rolling their eyes and saying, I know. Like, they're going to get annoyed with you. If they're not getting annoyed with you, you're not talking enough. Okay, and so have those conversations, ask them questions. What do you think makes a good relationship? How are your friends behaving? What makes a good friendship? Right? Those same characteristics that make a good friend often make a good partner. Okay, so how do we set the ground for that earlier? I have a 5-year-old at home, and we have had conversations for years about what are the qualities that we value in our friends, right? Because eventually that's going to translate into her dating. Okay, if her friends aren't being nice to her and she tolerates that, that's going to translate into a partner who she's going to let not treat her well. Okay, and so we want to call those things out and emphasize those values now. When we're talking to our kids about this stuff, we want an easy conversation, right? No pressure, no distractions, put your phone away for a little while. My favorite place to have big conversations is in the car, right? Because you can look at the road, you're not staring at your kid, they don't feel like they're on the spot, right? But also they're contained, right? They can't run away from you when you're driving. Okay, and so it feels like a low pressure and a private opportunity for a good conversation, right? You don't want to sit at Starbucks with them and ask them all about their dating life, right? Because who knows who's going to overhear. As we're talking with our kids, we need to set aside that instinct to try to fix everything for them or tell them what to do or how to behave appropriately, right? We want to listen to their ideas without judgment. Okay, we don't want to tell them how badly they screwed up. Okay, we want to, listen and say, okay, well, tell me more about that. Okay, how did that work for you? What do you think is the next step? Okay, let's listen without judgment. Kids are, it may not feel like it all the time, but your kids care about your opinion of them, right? And so if they're afraid that you're going to judge them and criticize them, they're not going to want to open up to you. Okay, be open to your child's ideas. It's absolutely okay to share your personal values and your family values with your child, but recognize that they're also forming their own thoughts and their own belief system about what is okay, and be open and willing to listen to that and have a no pressure conversation about that. I think what their perspective is, imagine what they're going through. And that can be really challenging for a lot of us, as most of us who are now parenting teens did not grow up with all of this technology, right? And so when our kids are talking about digital abuse or things that are happening online, or somebody circulated this embarrassing picture, it can be hard for us to understand, right? And so try to put yourself in their shoes and really imagine how that is impacting them, even if it feels silly to you. Even if you're saying, oh, Snapchat's ridiculous, maybe, but it might be important to your kid. Okay. Help your child recognize warning signs, whether that is in their own relationship or in relationships around them. Maybe your kid isn't dating yet, right? And so maybe looking to their friends as examples, right? So tell me about so-and-so. How does their partner treat them? Or when you all were hanging out here the other day, it seemed like so-and-so's partner was maybe getting a little forceful with them. Is that normal? Does that happen a lot? Right? Help them recognize those warning signs and ask them about it. Okay, we're not making accusations. We're not saying, man, that person was a real jerk. We're saying, hey, what do you think about that? And let's talk about that. I use those relevant examples from the news, from movies, from TV shows, from music as you're listening, right? Say like, hey, what do you think of the Ross and Rachel dilemma on Friends, right? Were they on a break? Or let's, include some of those media examples and understand your kid's thought process about that. Okay. And then also we want to be sure we are teaching boundaries and consent even from early ages. As we are thinking about boundaries, our boundaries are our comfort levels, and we want to teach our kids to identify their boundaries and assert their boundaries. We also want to teach our kids to respect other people's boundaries too. Okay, so when I say boundary, that might be something physical. It might be how comfortable are you with being touched? Okay, it might be, are you okay with a hug? Okay, it might be, you know what, I feel comfortable with hugging my partner in public, but I don't feel comfortable with kissing them in public, right? That's a great boundary that we can set. Okay. We can do this in a lot of different ways. Boundaries don't have to be romantic. They don't have to be sexual. Our boundary, when my daughter was 3, she went through a spitting phase, right? And she just all over us all the time. And I would say, you know what? I'm not going to let you spit on me. So if you spit on me, I'm going to walk away. That's my boundary, right? And so that's just something that we just ingrained all the time. Okay, and she knew that I was going to follow through on that. I couldn't necessarily control her behavior, but she knew that my behavior was going to be to walk away. Right. And so we want to define that. We want to model that, and we want to show that to our kids as often as possible. When we talk about consent, we're talking about permission, right? And we, again, want to model this with our kids, whether that is, hey, can I have a high five? Can I give you a hug today? Right? Because those things eventually translate into interactions with their partners. Okay. Whether that is physical or even sexual consent. Okay. Consent needs to be affirmative. It needs to be saying yes. The absence of no is not the same as a yes. Okay. Our consent is given for a specific act at a specific time. Okay. Just because you say yes once doesn't mean you're going to say yes the next time. Okay. Consent can be revoked. We can change our mind. Okay. We can make plans for the weekend and then decide when the weekend gets here, hey, I'm not feeling it. Okay. We can be in the middle of an interaction with our partner and decide we don't like it, we're uncomfortable, and we can say stop. And anything beyond that is assault, right? That is non-consensual behavior. And this is especially important to communicate with our kids because not only do we want to protect our kids from becoming victims, we also want to protect our kids from becoming perpetrators, right? When we think about why consent is so important, oftentimes we need that understanding so we can make sure that all of our interactions are consensual. If you only teach your kid that no means no, and that's the only conversation you have about consent, they're going to get into a situation down the road where, maybe their partner is drinking at a party and they assume they have consent, but we know legally, okay, and maybe even ethically, if you're really drunk, you cannot give your consent, right? You are incapacitated and unable to do so, right? And so we need to have these conversations over and over and over. Same with this idea of coercion, right? If our boss or our teacher or our coach or somebody in a position of power demands that we do something, even if we say yes, if we're feeling coerced or compelled, that's not consent. Right? And we can't make assumptions about consent based on silence, okay, or the absence of a no. Okay, we want to make sure that our kids understand what that looks like so we can help them be the best partner that they can be.
Okay.
Yeah, and kind of
So
just going
Kaylin,
off
yeah,
of
what
that.
are parents looking for if they think their kiddo may be experiencing abuse? What can they do?
Yes. So as you can see here, 3 main things that we really want to push to kind of just keep in the back of parents' minds. Number 1, right? We want you guys to just make sure that you are believing everything that is being said to you. I know that is a huge fear with students and teenagers, when they talk about this, they're like, what if nobody believes me? What if I'm speaking up for myself for no reason, right? They're going to you as an adult because they do trust you. And that's just going to help that much better if you truly believe everything that they say. We also want to make sure that we're not being judgmental, right? Even though this may be your kid or maybe it's one of your children's best friends, whoever it is, approach the situation without judgment. It's going to make it feel like a safe place for them. And once they get to that point, if they're able to kind of tell an adult what has been happening, if they have been experiencing abuse, it's going to make them feel like they kind of did the right thing because they're getting validation from this person. They're going through the steps that they need to. And then, like I said, always making sure that they feel heard and seen. I know the main thing when it comes to this is just to try to remain calm. Obviously, a lot of red flags and alarm bells are going to be going off in your head if your child goes to you and says this type of thing, but just try to remain calm. It's the main thing to allow you to get to those next steps of how can we help you? What resources can we go through? And then again, a couple other things, right? We always like saying focus on the behaviors and not the person. I always like using the reasoning of there's already so much emphasis and focus on the abuser or the perpetrator and not so much on the actual behaviors and the victims themselves, right? They're getting enough attention, doing their thing, taking control as they want to, right? But just focusing on what those behaviors are and reinforcing, hey, this is not a healthy characteristic. This is what it would look like if it was healthy, right? And then you can also see at the top of there, it says make a safety plan. I always mention the National Domestic Hotline. They actually have a whole safety plan on their website where it goes through different steps. It's kind of like a virtual guideline as to different steps that you can actually take with your teen or your child to kind of go through what the different steps of those looks like to have that plan set in stone. And then we don't want to put blame on them, right? As Kelly mentioned towards the beginning, on average, it takes somebody 7 times to leave an unhealthy or abusive relationship, and sometimes many, many more, right? Like that's on average. It is going to take everybody different timings. And like we said, they are obviously connected to their partner. There's probably love behind that. So it doesn't make it seem so easy from our perspective. Kind of put yourself in their perspective to see how that they may feel. And we also wanted to mention some resources as well. So obviously we have Kelly here with us that has talked to you with Prevail. That's kind of our local one here in Hamilton County. Everything resource related there. And then on the right-hand side, you can kind of see those national hotlines that we always refer to as well. That way you have local and national versions of resources and not just one or the other.
Kelly, I want to take this time too to allow you just some extra time to talk about the services that Prevail does provide and the best way for people to reach out to you if, I mean, obviously we've got these numbers here, but if they're looking for a little extra support and what that looks like when they come to you.
Absolutely. So Prevail works with victims of crime and abuse in a lot of different capacities. The vast majority of our clients come to us after experiencing domestic violence, dating violence, and sexual violence in particular. And that can look like a lot of different things, just depending on what those clients come in with. At Prevail, we are advocates. We're not counselors or therapists. So advocacy is kind of a fancy way of saying a support person, right? And so we're there to help support and empower people as they walk through whatever journey brought them to our door, right? Whether that is experiencing harm in a relationship or whether it's a random act of violence or whatever it might be. So everybody comes in with a little bit of different needs in a different situation, and they're at a different place. And our job is to help support them either in crisis or in a long-term capacity as well. All of our services at Prevail are confidential, so we never share information about our clients or tell anyone that you are a client here. And all of our services are free, which is an incredible asset to the community, right? We don't want money to be a barrier to safety. We work with kids as young as 6 years old at Prevail all the way up through adults. We have advocates that specialize in working with kids, with teens, and with adults. So a wide variety of services there. We have great services available for what we call secondary victims. So let's say your child experiences sexual violence in their life, you're still probably going to have some feelings about that as a parent, right? And so we also provide services to you as that caretaker in order to support your own feelings and experiences and help you learn how to best support your child as well. So a lot of great ways to receive help and support at Prevail. We do have a 24-hour crisis line, so we have an advocate available 24 hours a day. Anytime you are welcome to reach out with questions, comments, concerns, make an appointment, whatever it is that you might need.
That's a great transition. We're going to stop now to answer any questions that folks might have about teen dating violence. Feel free to place those questions in the comments box. And while we're waiting and checking on those questions, I'm going to offer up Kaylin and Kelly's contact information. Feel free to reach out to them after the webinar. Both are happy to field any additional questions that you might have or point you in the direction of the support services you might need. Kelly, let's talk too, because I know next month is a big month for you guys at Prevail. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like.
Absolutely. So October is nationally recognized as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So it's a great time to pause and acknowledge the prevalence of domestic violence within our own community. We like to think that we're relatively safe here in Hamilton County, and while we certainly don't experience the same amount of violent crimes as other places, we do still see abuse here at the same rate as any place else in our state or in our country, right? And so by standing with us through October, you can don your purple and show your recognition of survivors of domestic violence. October 17th this year is National Go Purple Day, so you can wear your purple, snap a picture, post it on social media, and tag us in it and help show your support and your awareness for the people who have experienced domestic violence in their lives.
Fantastic. Kaylin, are you seeing any questions out there?
No questions.
No questions. Quiet crowd. Okay, well, as we promised, here is a look at the upcoming webinars that we'll be hosting the rest of the year. Hard to believe it. We only have 3 left. What if you could protect your child from more than 6 different types of cancer? You can. And next month, we'll be talking about the human I can never say this. Kaylin, give me an assist. Papillomavirus.
That was great.
Horrible. HPV. Yeah.
There you go.
It is the most common sexually transmitted infection in the United States. And there's a series of vaccines available for preteens, teens, 20-somethings that can actually prevent cancer and genital warts. So if you're interested in participating in that or any of these other webinars, you're just going to want to log on to the Hamilton County Health Department's website, click on the Health Education tab, and then you'll see a tab for children's webinars. Ladies, I want to thank you again. I'm going to put up your contact information one last time. Really do feel free to reach out to them. Both of these women have great knowledge and are more than happy to field any questions that you might have. We thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time to listen and learn. And if you'd like to share this information with someone who maybe wasn't able to be here tonight, we will be posting a recording of this webinar on our social media sites, the Hamilton County Health Department's media sites, tomorrow morning. That's it. We wish you all a very good